My name is Nikki Galloway. I'm the Research Data Management Librarian with ODU Libraries. And we're doing this presentation in collaboration with the Career Pathways program. So I'm here to give a little bit of an overview of the DMP tool. I'm going to start with a presentation and then we'll get into a demonstration as well. So these are the objectives that I hope you come away with today. We'll review the components of a data management plan, and then mainly learn how to use a DMP tool to create a data management plan for maybe your thesis, dissertation, or another research project, and then identify some support options within the DMP tool as well. Briefly, I just wanted to go over the objectives from the Research Data Management Planning Workshop. This was back in September. It was recorded and it's on this YouTube page. We talked about the importance of research data management, activities that fall within research data management, funder and journal requirements, again, the components of a data management plan, which we're going to go over again today, and then institutional support services. I'm going to give a little bit of a review just for context, but I just won't be going in as much depth. So research data management is a term which is used to describe the processes that researchers and institutions use for organizing, securing, archiving, and sharing research data throughout the research life cycle. So we talked about research data and what that means from the ODU policy. So it's digitally recorded information that's necessary to support or validate a research project's observations, findings, or outputs. We talked about the research data life cycle, an example of what you see here. And then we also talked a little bit about data management practices from organization, documentation, storage, and sharing and preservation perspectives. We also discussed some of the important reasons why we should both manage our data and document how we're managing our data. So we want to be able to find and understand our data. It provides project continuity. If your data is organized, you're going to save time looking for that data. It reduces our risk of lost, stolen, or misused data. You can comply with funder and journal requirements, and data can be shared. But we also noted that properly managing and recording our data and our data management activities doesn't necessarily need to equate to sharing or publishing that data. So some kinds of data may not be shareable to the nature of the records themselves. So a little bit about data management plans. They can and probably should be created at the beginning of the project. That's the best time to think about all of your activities, all aspects of managing your data, assigning roles and responsibilities. So DMP should be thought of as living documents. They should be updated when necessary, when situations change. We know that research, it can and it does change throughout the life cycle of the project. So data management plans should be updated with the, when and why those changes occurred. Should always be shared with your project team. So it's not just you working on a project, making sure everyone is on the same page, especially with onboarding new colleagues or offboarding colleagues, make sure that you have all the data necessary. And then you should reference the data management plan throughout the project. So maybe you didn't really understand, or someone needs to know how they organize that data. Where do I need to put this data? I got this information from a colleague. What should I name it? What documentation do I need to provide with it? Where does it go? And that should be outlined in your data management plan. So we're going to go over these a little bit more in depth once we get into the DMP tool. But just to give a brief overview, a data management plan generally includes this type of information. It may vary if you are submitting a proposal to a grant. Always want to check their specific requirements. The DMP tool can help with that too, but funders may have different guidance and specifications they want in their data management plan. But generally, you're going to describe the types of data that you're going to use or produce or create, how you're going to document that data, any ethical or compliance issues you might need to be aware of, how you're going to store and back up your data, plans for archiving and preserving it, and then also providing access to that data if you will be sharing it, and then the roles, responsibilities, and oversight. So there's a couple ways that we can write a data management plan. One is to use a template or framework that is provided by funders and other organizations. So NIH has a template, NOAA has a template, ICPSR has a framework for creating a data management plan. So You may also hear different terms for these documents as well. You may hear it being called a data management sharing plan, open science and data management plan. So just be aware that you may hear other terminology around data management plans. But the other way, and the way that we're going to look at today, is to use the DMP tool. So it's a free application, and it helps researchers create data management plans in a click-through interface. And then it also has direct links to funder websites, and it has help text for answering some questions along the way, and then also some help documentation. It's a service that's run by the California Digital Library. So we are going to go into that now, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Everyone see it okay? Okay. So I have my notes here, so I don't forget anything in the demo. So part one, or the first step, will be signing up or logging in. So if we go, I already have a login, but sign up should be very similar. You'll see up here at the top the public plans and funder requirements. You don't need to be signed up to view those. So if we went to funder requirements, you can search for a funder, say NSF maybe, and then you can see all of their plans and links and things like that. If you do want to create a new plan, which is what we'll go over, we do need to log in. And then the other one that doesn't necessarily require a login is the public plans. So note that these haven't necessarily been vetted by funders or anything like that as if they're a good plan, but they might give you some ideas, and they're good to look at if you're just starting out with plans. Okay, I'm going to go to the login. And you always want to use your ODU. So we're going to use our institutional address. We continue. It says I'm associated with Old Dominion. That's great. And then it's going to ask me to sign in with my mites. So do that. Okay. So once you log in, you're going to see this dashboard. And up at the top, you can always come back to the dashboard. If you navigate away from it, then you'll have a great plan, and you'll still see those public plans and the funder requirements. The next section down, if you go to Old Dominion University, it's going to take you to odu.edu. This link here, the ODU Data Management Guide, will take us to ODU's library guide. And then this is by email in the Getting Help created by creating a data management plan. So there's a couple ODU specific guides there. In the dashboard, you will see all of the plans that either you have created or that have been shared with you by others. And then below that, you'll see Old Dominion University plans. These are slightly different than the public plans, and that these are only made available to Old Dominion University personnel. So if you wanted to take a look at one of those are available here as well. Okay, make sure I wanted to cover everything. Okay, there is at the bottom, I didn't go over these yet. Again, funder requirements, public plans, help. I'm going to come back to that at the end. But just to make sure that there are things at the bottom as well. Okay. So does anyone have any questions about the dashboard so far? Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and create a plan. So you can create a plan here, or you can create a plan up at the top. It'll take you to the same page. And you'll get to this create a new plan. And sometimes if you hover over these, you're going to see if you're applying for funding, you want to state the project title exactly as it is in the proposal. If you're creating a mock project for testing, practice, or educational purposes, Old Dominion University would be our research organization. And then down here, if you had a funder, you could type in the funder here, NIH, for example, National Institutes of Health. And then if the funder has multiple templates, it's going to ask you which template you want to use. And then another good example of that is the National Science Foundation. And it has a whole list of the templates that you would use depending on which division you were applying for. I'm actually going to go back to my homepage because I've created just a project that's a mock project with no funder associated with it. So back to my dashboard. I'm going to go into my project. So I've already given it a title. I've said it's a mock project. A couple other things on this project details page, project abstract, a research domain from a dropdown. If you know the project start and end date, and then if you did actually get a funder, you could put it in there. So the only thing that is required on this page is the project title, but I'd recommend putting as much information in as you can. The more information, the better, so you can understand your research project and so other people can understand it as well. You'll notice that as I'm hovering over this, you are seeing this little box pop up that gives you a little bit more information about what to put in that area. So the next thing I just wanted to review was the select guidance. So right now it has the DMP tool selected. And I did want, let me see if I can go back really quick. I don't know. Okay, so right now this does say that it is the Digital Curation Center template. European Union also has a version. It's called DMP Online, I believe, but they've partnered together under kind of one umbrella. So one open source software to populate both of those. So that's why you may see the Digital Curation Center here. Okay, so this select guidance, you can select up to 6 organizations to see their guidance. ODU doesn't currently have specific guidance, but if you wanted to see the full list, maybe you're working with a collaborator at a different institution, you could scroll down here, pick up to 6. After you pick 6, it'll gray out. And then, so I will just pick one for, we'll just do, let's say James Madison. And then if I X out, I should see that here and I can click them on and off. And then you would save it. And then as you're clicking through your writing plan, you'll see those different guidance options that you can toggle through. And I'll show you that in a little bit. I am just going to toggle that off for now. So you'll see these 6 tabs up at the top. We'll go through each one individually. So we've got through the project details. The next one is collaborators. So the first one you want to list are the principal investigators. So that's at least going to be you. So if I wanted to put my name in here, you have an ORCID ID, I can put that in there. I'm affiliated with ODU, and then you would click on whichever ones apply to you. And as you hover over them, you can see what that actually means. So if you're a data manager, the data management activities that you would be responsible for, principal investigator. So if you had other principal investigators, you'd want to list them here. If you have people that you would want to collaborate with, either to read or edit or just review your plan, you could invite them and they would get a notification in their email that they have access to your plan. So you just put their email in here and then you can give them different permissions. So if it's a co-owner, they can view the plan, they can answer questions, they can comment. The editor, you can edit the plan, but read only, they could just read only the plan or comment on it. So depending on the level of permissions that you want the person to have, you could do that. When you submit it, they will get a notification that they are now have access to your plan. Okay. So the next part is actually the bulk of the DMP tool. So you're actually writing your plan. I'm using kind of the default no funder plan right now. I can go through a couple other ones just as examples to show you that some of these will be different depending on which funder you do choose. So in here, the first one is data collection. So you'll be able to expand and collapse all of these. And then you'll see a little progress bar on the top to see how many you have actually filled out. So on the data collection, first part, again, we talked about what type of data are you going to collect? What format is it going to be in? How much data are you going to collect? Are you reusing existing data? So those are just some things to consider. And then it's telling us that we need to give a brief description of our data in this section. I believe the NIH does give some template language, but I believe that's the only one I've seen so far that does so. We may see that in the future when more funders are coming out with their policies, but this is where for you to go in and review what you're actually going to do with your project. So that's like kind of what data we're going to collect or create, and then how the data will be collected or created. So what are the methods you're going to use? Are you using surveys? Are you using experimental methodology? Are you going to be using any standards? And then this is important too. How is the quality of the data going to be controlled and documented as well? So I'll go ahead and minimize that one. The next one is documentation and metadata. So this is what information is needed for the data to be read and interpreted in the future. So this isn't necessarily creating that metadata right now, but how are you going to create this documentation? Is it going to be a README file? Where are you going to put your definitions of your variables? Are you going to use specific vocabularies for your data? And then, as I said, where are you going to put this information, how it's going to be recorded? The next one is the ethics and legal compliance. So if I'm going to see how, so for the guidance so far, we only saw DCC. I'm going to click over to the DMPTool one and just see if they have anything different. So here it talks about if you're going to be working with human participants, the consent process, how are you going to protect the identity of participants, if you're generating data derived from indigenous lands, that sort of thing. So all of the ethical concerns to think through. And that especially will come into play too when we get down to the storage as well. There's also this copyright intellectual property rights. If you do have questions on that, that might be any restrictions needed on data sharing, if anything is going to be patentable or anything like that. And this really leads into the storage and backup as well. So how are this data going to be stored and backed up is really going to be dependent on what type of data you are collecting. So if it is sensitive data, there's going to be different levels of security that you're going to need to follow and different places that you're going to need to store your data. A good thing to think about are also backups. So maybe in the field, if you are doing field work, you might have to store it on a hard drive, but that's probably not the best place to keep it for the long term. And you probably want to have a backup plan when you come back into the office using a more networked storage that has maybe some formal backup plans there. Managing access and security. So if there are any access controls, if you have sensitive data, if you're working with human participants, who needs to have access, when, why? So you may need to have some controls around who is accessing the data during the active collection and processing stage. The selection and preservation. So this is when you're thinking about what data are you going to be retaining, sharing, and preserving. So maybe not all of your data needs to be shared and preserved, or some institutions and organizations tell you what is not considered data under their plan. So those types of things wouldn't necessarily need to be included in your data management plan. And then the long-term preservation plan. This also gets into data sharing as well, or where are the data going to be deposited. NIH, at least now, and I think the NSF will be asking in the proposals, where is your data going to be stored at the outset? That doesn't mean that can't change during the project, but where are you thinking about storing your data? And if you need to get in touch with that repository and talk to them about if your data is a good fit for that repository, all things to think about at this stage. the DMPTool does put this budgeting in here. I believe it's a different item in proposals, but it is just something to think about, that if your data repository requires a cost at the end, and your data management has a cost, like your time and energy. So just thinking about that when you're planning your project. And then again, this kind of leads into data sharing as far as how you're going to share your data. Where are you going to put it? How are you going to make your data available, and when are you going to make it available? Some funders and some journals will want it at the time of publication, that underlying data. Do you have to have restrictions on data sharing? So are you going to need to anonymize your data, de-identify your data? Did you get participant consent? Is it so sensitive that maybe it needs to be have agreements in place before people use that, or even put in a closed access form? And then that kind of leads into the restrictions. So any data restrictions, you'll need to think about those as far as ethics and privacy. And some repositories do allow either embargoes or restricted access. So if that is something that's important to you, just make sure you're doing your homework on your repository to make sure that it is going to have the things that you need to protect your data. And then who's going to be responsible for data management? So if it's a thesis or a dissertation, perhaps that might just be you, the one person that's going to be doing this project. If you're working collaboratively with other people on a project, you want to outline who's going to be doing what as far as backups, and who is responsible for where you're going to store the data. If you're storing that data at different institutions, if it's not just one person at one institution, those are all things you'll want to think about at this phase. And then the resources that you will require. This could be talking to ITS for storage. Could be talking to, your partners at other institutions, things like that. So that is the plan itself. So that's the nuts and bolts of what you should put into the plan. Like I said, if you do have a specific funder in mind, I'll show you a couple of those. They do look a little bit different, but they do generally all have similar items that need to be included in the data management plan. I will say that it also varies, the length can vary. Some funders may require it to be only 2 pages. I was looking at the Department of Transportation though, and some of theirs were pretty lengthy. So I would say put as much information in here as possible, but be as concise as you need to be, and never get rid of your original. But there may be places that if you do need to get it into a limit of some sort, to do that after you've kind of got all your thoughts down on paper. The next tab is the research outputs tab. So this is where you list all your research outputs as far as what you think you're going to be creating or even using during your plan or your project. When you go to finalize your plan, I can't do anything with that right now because I haven't answered most of the questions. You can make your plan visible, you can make it public, or you can keep it private, or you can just make it for the organization. So anyone at OBU can view it, but nobody else. If you needed to register your plan for an ID, you could do that here. And then finally, you could come to the download, depending on the format you need. There's different formats. And those are kind of the finalization. You do have to have most of your plan put together before you get to this stage. So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to go back to the create plan for just a minute. And I'm going to just do a test NIH. I'm going to say it's a mock project, but I am going to say it does have a funder. So okay, so I go to NIH, and I'm going to do that again. I'm going to click it. It's going to ask me what template I want. I'm just going to go with the default for right now. So if I go ahead and create that plan, and I go to write plan, you're going to see a little bit different items that need to be added. So in this one, it wants to know what related tools and software you might be using. Associated timelines is a big one here. So they want to know when you're going to release your data. And then I believe it's in Access where they exactly want to know where you're going to put your data. But this is, and they also have example answers. And as I said, I think this is the only one that does have example answers. But you do want to be careful when you're using any template or any boilerplate language, because when you are putting it in your DMP and you do submit it to a funder, this is what you said you were going to do. So just make sure it makes sense, and you read over it really carefully if you're going to be using any of that template language. We're going to go back to our dashboard as well, and I'm just going to click on one of these here, just so you can kind of get a feel for what a finalized plan might look like. So this is all the information about your plan, your abstract, the grant that it's associated with, if it is associated with a grant. So we have the PIs in here. There's no proprietary or patentable data expected. So this one's a little different. This one is for the IMLS, and I forget what this one is called. But it's a little bit of a different structure than some of like NSF or NIH, but it does have similar things. Let's see, equipment, software, supplies that you're going to use, all the digital file formats, the quality control plan we talked about, metadata, access, and use. So even though they're listed differently, they might have different sections. We're seeing a lot of the same items come up over and over in these data management plans. So does anyone want to see anything else while I'm on the dashboard, or need to go back to anything when creating the plan? Okay, the last thing I will go to is the help. So there's 3 helps: the help for researchers, help for administrators, and the data management guidance. So the help for researchers, it's kind of a quick start guide. You know, who's using the tool? Well, we just went over the review of the dashboard, creating it. If we go back to help and we go to data management guidance, this goes into a lot more detail about types of data, file formats, organized. So a lot of it is best practices for data management in general. So you can always jump back to these. It's got some really good information. What's your source of your data? Talk about how stable it is, file formats, file naming conventions, documenting our data and how we might do that. Talks about persistent identifiers, security, and storage. So a lot of good information in here as well. So I'm going to make sure I covered everything I wanted to cover. I think I did. Okay. So I'm going to minimize this. If we want to come back to it, just let me know. But at this point, I just wanted to outline some resources. We looked at the ones for the data management plan on their website. There's on campus, there are libraries, there's research assistants. You can email me, you can email your subject specialist. There we have a calendar link where you can look at our open times. Information technology services, they are really their research computing support, data storage. They have information for sensitive and regulated data. The Division of Research and Economic Development, they help with the grant and funding development, compliance, also innovations and commercialization, any sponsored programs. So if you are going to get funding, that you would always go through sponsored programs. They'll submit everything for you. And then we have several other centers on campus as well. If you're doing surveys, Social Science Research Center, Geospatial Science Education and Analytics, a whole lot of resources on campus. So I would encourage you to reach out to any of those if you have any questions. I will just throw in here as well ODU library guides. So we do maintain the data management at ODU guide. We also have a funder policies guide. Some other additional information. We looked at the quick start guide for researchers and data management guidance. ASU Libraries has a DMPTool tutorial. So if you ever need to go back and look at some of these things again, this is being recorded, but there's a lot of information out there for help as well. All right, well, thank you, everybody. As I said, you can always get in touch with me, and hopefully see you at another webinar.